In this video, we uncover what happened to 5 rich people who got mauled by animals, from a man who gave slices of apple to an angry moose, to a trader who pursued a wounded leopard despite others' advice. But first, we begin with the desire of a man who led him into a fatal miscalculation with one of North America's most dangerous animals. It was May 12, 2015, and the South African bush lay quiet under a moonless sky as Milan Vorex stumbled out of the main lodge at Thornveld Private Estate, his dress shoes crunching on gravel as he made his way toward the perimeter fencing. Milan was a 52-year-old mining logistics executive from Johannesburg. 6 months earlier, he had purchased a fractional ownership stake near Hoedspruit, a luxury safari property. The estate featured guided game drives, a spa facility, and several enclosures housing animals being rehabilitated or, in some cases, raised in semi-captivity for eventual release. More recently, Milan had privately offered a substantial additional payment to gain closer access to restricted wildlife areas, a proposal the estate owner accepted despite internal objections. During his 3 previous visits, he had complained about restricted access to certain areas, questioned the competence of guides, and once attempted to tip a ranger to take him off trail during a walking safari. Caretakers and contracted wildlife consultants had warned management that allowing Milan any proximity to enclosed predators would be unsafe, but the owner dismissed the concerns after the financial offer was made. The estate manager had privately noted Milan's tendency to conflate his investment stake with operational authority. That evening, Milan had consumed at least 6 whiskeys at the lodge bar following a business dinner, his voice growing louder as he regaled other guests with stories of corporate acquisitions and hostile takeovers. At approximately 10:40 p.m., Milan left the main lodge through the rear terrace doors. 2 monochrome low-light cameras recorded him pausing to light a cigarette before walking with deliberate but unsteady steps toward the eastern paddock area. Estate policy explicitly required all guests to be escorted by armed security personnel after sunset, a rule printed on laminated cards in every guest room and verbally emphasized during check-in orientations. That same policy had been selectively relaxed earlier that week after the owner reassured staff that Milan's special access considered arrangement would be controlled. The estate housed numerous dangerous animals, and nocturnal movement attracted predators naturally active during those hours. African lions possess bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch, concentrated through canine teeth that can reach nearly 3 inches in length. Adult males typically weigh between 400 and 550 pounds, with shoulder heights of 4 feet and overall lengths exceeding 9 feet from nose to tail tip. Despite being raised in semi-captivity, lions retained much of their predatory instincts, their neurological wiring for stalking, ambushing, and killing remaining largely intact, despite human contact during development. The eastern paddock contained Tau, a 7-year-old male lion born at a breeding facility and transferred to Thornveld at age 2. While staff worked with him regularly for veterinary care, he was not domesticated. His enclosure featured double-gated access precisely because of his unpredictable responses to human presence. Handlers had specifically documented Tau as unsuitable for any guest interaction, a recommendation that had been overridden during recent internal discussions tied to Milan's request. Milan approached the outer fence, where Tau was visible in the moonlight, his dark mane outlined against pale dirt. Security cameras captured Milan examining the primary gate's padlock before moving along the fence line to the secondary service entrance, typically used only by keepers during feeding routines. This gate, secured with a sliding bolt rather than a padlock, was accessible from the outside. A previously flagged maintenance issue staff had delayed addressing after leadership shifted focus toward accommodating Milan's paid access expectations. Milan slid the bolt open. Milan entered through the secondary gate, leaving it partially open behind him. Tau, who had been lying near a water trough 40 feet away, rose immediately. His posture shifted, shoulders lowered, head extended forward, tail still. These were textbook indicators of predatory focus, not curiosity. Milan advanced several steps into the enclosure, then crouched low, extending his right hand toward the approaching lion in a gesture that likely seemed friendly in his intoxicated state, but mimicked the vulnerability posture of prey animals. Tau closed the distance in 4 measured strides. When he was within 6 feet, he accelerated. Security footage captured the moment of first contact as the lion's jaws opened and clamped directly onto Milan's throat in a single, practiced motion. The force of the impact knocked Milan backward. His hands instinctively rose toward the lion's face, but Tau's grip was absolute. Tau then exhibited classic post-kill behavior, dragging his prey away from the entry point. He pulled Milan's body across the enclosure, moving backward while maintaining his throat grip. leaving a continuous blood trail through the dirt. Milan's legs twitched and kicked reflexively, his dress shoes scraping parallel lines in the earth. Severing of the carotid vessels would have caused rapid loss of consciousness within seconds. The dragging continued for approximately 30 feet before Tao paused near a cluster of rocks. Security personnel monitoring camera feeds noticed the breach and immediately radioed armed response. 2 guards already stationed on active perimeter watch nearby arrived at the enclosure within roughly 40 seconds. One fired a warning shot into the air. Tao did not release. The second guard fired a round aimed into the ground near the lion as a last resort to startle it. Tao finally released Milan's throat and retreated 15 feet, watching the guards with ears flattened. Milan's body remained motionless, his head at an unnatural angle, clothing soaked black with blood. On-site medics stationed at the estate for remote operations reached the scene within 3 minutes. They found no pulse and massive tissue destruction to the anterior neck. A medical helicopter dispatched from Hodsprut reached the estate in 18 minutes, but resuscitation efforts had ceased minutes earlier. Milan was declared dead. Milan's funeral was held in Johannesburg 6 days later, attended primarily by business associates and distant relatives. Tao remained at the facility, placed under stricter containment and behavioral monitoring following a review by authorities. The lion had released its grip only after gunfire, and in a similar scenario with ignorance and entitlement, a man would offer fruits to a raging moose. It was October 3rd, 2016, and the morning sun had barely crested the peaks above Aspen when Rhett Caldera stepped onto his deck, coffee in hand, and spotted the bull moose for the second time that week. What began as casual observation would end with neighbors watching in horror as nature's violence unfolded in suburban Colorado. Rhett Caldera was a 41-year-old hedge fund manager from Denver, known among colleagues for his calculated approach to municipal pension allocations that had quietly accumulated considerable wealth over 15 years. His reputation in finance circles was built on measured risk-taking and confident decision-making, traits that had served him well professionally, but translated poorly to his recent lifestyle aspirations. According to colleagues, 6 months earlier, he had purchased a seasonal property on the outskirts of Aspen, less out of genuine outdoor interest and more to project a rugged outdoorsman image to high-net-worth clients who increasingly valued authenticity over polish. Neighbors later told investigators that Rhett had become fixated on appearing connected to nature, often dismissing local guidance about wildlife boundaries as overprotective. His housekeeper mentioned he had been documenting wildlife encounters on social media. That morning, he told a friend through text about his intention to get closer footage of the moose he had been observing from his balcony, grabbing his phone and a plastic container of apple slices as bait, despite posted community rules and local advisories prohibiting feeding wildlife. Bull moose can weigh up to 1,500 pounds and stand 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with antlers spanning 6 feet that serve as both weapons and battering rams. During autumn rut season, testosterone levels spike dramatically, making bulls unpredictably aggressive toward any perceived threat. Unlike bears or mountain lions that typically avoid humans, moose are responsible for more wildlife-related injuries in Colorado than all other species combined. Their preferred defensive strategy involves charging and trampling, using their massive front hooves, each capable of delivering crushing blows, to eliminate threats through sheer force and repetition. That morning, multiple homeowners in the surrounding area had reported a large bull moose lingering near driveways and trash enclosures to local dispatch earlier that morning. Colorado Parks and Wildlife had posted notices throughout the neighborhood 2 days earlier, specifically warning residents not to approach moose during rut season, with particular emphasis on maintaining distance of at least 50 yards. The posted flyers included graphic descriptions of previous incidents and photographs of injuries sustained from moose attacks. Rhett had seen the same animal earlier from his balcony and told his housekeeper he planned to get closer footage before she left for her morning errands. Despite the posted wildlife notices visible on community bulletin boards and his own mailbox, he walked toward the animal holding his phone in one hand and the plastic container of apples in the other, while wearing slick-soled loafers. Witnesses from across the street later told deputies the moose initially stood still near Rhett's driveway, its massive antlers catching morning light, but pinned its ears back flat against its skull as Rhett moved within roughly 15 feet. A clear warning sign of imminent aggression. The moose lunged without further warning, closing the distance in 2 powerful strides. Rhett turned to retreat, but his slick soles slipped on loose gravel as the animal's lowered head drove into his torso with the force of a small vehicle, knocking him violently backward against the side of his parked Range Rover. The impact was audible from across the street, a hollow metallic boom as his body compressed the SUV's door panel inward, leaving a visible dent that investigators later photographed. The moose continued its forward momentum, driving him down beneath its front hooves before pivoting and slamming him onto the pavement. The animal brought a foreleg down with crushing force, then delivered a violent hind leg kick, bringing its full weight down against Rhett's head and shoulders. Rhett attempted to crawl away during a brief pause, his movements weak and uncoordinated, but the moose pivoted and trampled him again. This time its hooves struck his upper body repeatedly, its weight concentrated through each impact. Blood began pooling beneath his head, spreading across the pale gravel of his driveway. The moose continued its assault, driving another heavy foreleg strike before finally backing away. The entire attack lasted roughly 40 seconds. The animal moved off toward the tree line, leaving Rhett motionless in his driveway, his phone lying several feet away, its screen cracked but still recording toward the morning sky. A neighbor called 911 immediately from her kitchen window, where she had witnessed the entire incident. Paramedics arrived, finding Rhett unresponsive with massive cranial trauma, crushed chest cavity, and severe spinal injuries. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 9:47 a.m. The county coroner's report listed cause of death as massive blunt force trauma to the head, neck, and thorax consistent with trampling, with associated internal hemorrhaging. The report noted extensive crushing injuries consistent with trampling by large ungulate, skull fractures indicating multiple impacts, and chest compression severe enough to cause cardiac arrest. Wildlife officers located and tranquilized the bull moose later that afternoon in nearby woods after initial hazing attempts earlier in the day failed to move it from the residential area. The animal, estimated at 1,200 pounds with a 6-foot antler spread, showed no signs of disease or abnormal behavior and was relocated despite Rhett's daughters protesting for it to be euthanized. Rhett's property was sold quietly within a year through a trust. The driveway resurfaced to remove visible damage. While Hooves finished the work in Colorado, another man would require pole-wielding handlers to separate him from the rage of a chimpanzee. It was August 21st, 2017, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the private vineyard estate outside Napa Valley, where Darian Kestrel kept 2 adult male chimpanzees in a custom-built enclosure behind his main residence. Darian was a 46-year-old venture capitalist from San Francisco, known in tech circles for his aggressive investment strategy and taste for the unconventional. His 40-acre estate featured not only award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon vines, but also an exotic animal collection that included the 2 chimpanzees, Titan and Brutus, acquired 3 years earlier from a private breeder in Nevada, through a third-party arrangement that would later draw regulatory scrutiny. According to colleagues, Darian had paid nearly $70,000 for the pair, housing them in what he described as a state-of-the-art facility with indoor and outdoor spaces. To his associates, the chimps represented power and nonconformity. To his staff, they represented a mounting liability. Darian employed a full-time handler named Benny Liv, who had repeatedly documented concerns about the chimps' increasingly aggressive behavior. Records later obtained by authorities showed at least 6 incident reports filed in the months leading up to the attack, detailing territorial displays, food aggression, and mounting tension between the 2 males. Darian had dismissed these warnings, insisting that Benny was being overcautious and that he himself had a rapport with the animals that transcended typical owner-pet dynamics. What Darian didn't understand was the fundamental nature of the animals he kept. Adult male chimpanzees can weigh roughly 88 to 132 pounds, though some captive males grow larger and possess muscle composition that produces notably greater peak force than a human of similar size. Their arms, built for climbing and territorial combat, can exert crushing force capable of snapping bone. Chimpanzees have canine teeth over an inch long and jaws capable of inflicting devastating tearing injuries. Most critically, chimpanzees are not domesticable. Even those raised from infancy retain wild instincts and can become violently unpredictable, particularly males competing for dominance. That afternoon, Benny had noticed increasing tension between Titan and Brutus during feeding time. The 2 chimps, both around 10 years old and entering peak physical maturity, had been displaying classic signs of dominance conflict for weeks: charging displays, aggressive vocalizations, and posturing. By 4:30 p.m., their agitation had escalated into a physical confrontation, with both animals screaming and grappling near the outdoor section of the enclosure. Darian had been reviewing paperwork in his home office when Benny called to inform him of the situation. Rather than heeding Benny's suggestion to attempt separation using barriers and observation from outside the enclosure, Darian drove his golf cart down to the enclosure. Benny said that Darian believed his presence would calm them, as he claimed it had done before. Benny, who had been monitoring the situation from outside the enclosure's perimeter fence, strongly advised against entering. Darien waved him off, retrieving the key to the service entrance from the handler's station. The attack began within seconds of Darien entering the enclosure. Titan, the larger of the two chimps, immediately redirected his aggression away from Brutus and toward the human who had just invaded their space during a heightened state of arousal. Chimpanzees in conflict are primed for violence, and the sudden appearance of a third party can trigger an explosive response. Titan charged with terrifying speed, closing the 15-foot distance before Darien could react. The first bite clamped down on Darien's right forearm as he instinctively raised it in defense. The force shattered both the radius and ulna, and Titan's canines punctured through to the bone. Darien screamed and tried to pull away, but the chimp's grip was absolute. Using his powerful arms, Titan jerked Darien off balance and down to his knees. Then Titan climbed onto Darien's torso, a position that gave the animal devastating leverage. The chimp's hands gripped Darien's shoulders while his feet found purchase on his chest. Titan's jaws opened and clamped onto the left side of Darien's face, just below the cheekbone. The bite was rapid, chaotic, repeated biting and tearing. With a violent jerking motion, Titan tore away a chunk of tissue that included part of the cheek and lower jaw, exposing teeth and bone underneath. Darien's screaming became gurgling as blood filled his mouth and throat. He fell backward onto the concrete, his hands weakly trying to push the animal away. Titan easily overpowered these attempts. The chimp then shifted position, moving down Darien's body with methodical intent. In what experts later explained is typical behavior in chimpanzee attacks, targeting areas that signify dominance and reproduction, Titan bit into Darien's groin area, tearing through clothing and flesh with several powerful bites that caused catastrophic damage consistent with femoral artery trauma and genitals. Benny, who had been screaming and banging on the fence, grabbed two long poles used for animal management and forced open the service gate. Brutus had retreated to the far corner, but Titan remained focused on his victim. Benny jabbed at Titan repeatedly with the poles, finally forcing the chimp to release and back away. The entire attack had lasted approximately 4 minutes. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes later following Benny's 911 call. They found Darien conscious but in severe shock, having lost massive amounts of blood. Paramedics attempted direct pressure and emergency hemorrhage control while preparing for airway intervention, but the tissue damage to his face made intubation nearly impossible. Despite aggressive intervention, Darien went into cardiac arrest during transport and was pronounced dead at 5:43 p.m. Authorities arrived at the estate within hours, accompanied by animal control officers and representatives. Titan was sedated and euthanized the following morning. Brutus was confiscated and transferred to a sanctuary facility, equipped to handle traumatized primates, though he was later euthanized as well due to behavioral issues. As Darien failed to intervene a raging primate in South Africa, no poles would stop what came for a tour operator who'd left the designated road in lion territory. It was February 9th, 2014, the late summer sun blazing over the bush near Kruger National Park's western boundary. Jonas Varelli steered his open-top safari jeep off the designated tourist road, ignoring the protests of his 4 passengers. Jonas Varelli was a 38-year-old South African who had established a safari company 3 years earlier after working as a junior guide for larger companies. His operation catered to wealthy international clients willing to pay premium rates for what he marketed as authentic, unfiltered wildlife encounters. His business model depended on delivering experiences that felt exclusive and dangerous, even if that meant taking risks that made veteran guides uncomfortable. That morning, Jonas had picked up 4 American tourists from their luxury lodge, a retired couple from Connecticut, and 2 brothers from Chicago, who had paid $800 each for a full-day private safari. Jonas had assured them they would see elephants up close, lions on a kill if they were lucky, and landscapes untouched by the typical tourist routes. By mid-morning, they had encountered several giraffe, a distant pride of lions, and countless impala, but Jonas was fixated on delivering the elephant encounter he had promised. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult bulls reaching heights of 13 feet at the shoulder and weighing up to 14,000 pounds. Females, though smaller, are fiercely protective of their herds and can be more dangerous than males when they perceive a threat. An elephant's trunk contains around 40,000 muscles and can lift 770 pounds, while their tusks, essentially elongated incisor teeth, can gore with devastating force. Despite their size, elephants can charge at speeds around 20 to 25 miles per hour. They possess excellent hearing and can communicate through low-frequency rumbles that travel for miles, coordinating herd movements and warning of danger. Jonas had spotted the herd 20 minutes earlier near a waterhole along the main road, but they had moved into denser bush before he could position his vehicle. Rather than wait or relocate, he turned off the paved tourist route onto a rough service track that rangers occasionally used for maintenance. One of his passengers asked if they were allowed to be there. Jonas laughed and said the best sightings always required going where others wouldn't. As he navigated between termite mounds and thorn trees, the elephant herd came into view. Approximately 12 individuals, including several calves, clustered around a muddy depression. The matriarch, a massive cow with one broken tusk, stood at the group's edge. Her ears began to spread wide, a clear warning display that experienced guides recognize as agitation. Jonas continued forward, maneuvering the jeep to within 40 yards. One of the brothers raised his camera, commenting on how close they were. The matriarch took several steps toward the vehicle, her trunk raised and swinging. Another unmistakable threat signal. Jonas shifted into reverse but continued staying close, likely confident he could retreat if necessary. He left his own lap belt unbuckled to move quickly while driving. The elephants near the mud began vocalizing, a deep rumbling that the passengers felt in their chests. Several younger elephants moved closer to the calves, bunching together. The matriarch's ears flapped forward and back, and she trumpeted, a piercing blast that caused one of the passengers to shout in alarm. Jonas finally began reversing, but the jeep's rear wheel caught on a hidden log, bringing them to a jarring halt. The matriarch charged without hesitation. The passengers later described it as impossibly fast, like watching a building collapse toward them. She covered 40 yards in about 4 seconds. Her ears pinned back, trunk curled under for protection, head lowered to bring her tusks to bear. Jonas threw the transmission into drive and accelerated, but the jeep lurched forward only a few feet before the elephant collided with the driver's side. The impact lifted the entire vehicle, tipping it onto 2 wheels before it rolled onto its side. The action camera recorded the sky and ground as the jeep flipped before tearing loose from its mount. The passengers, secured by simple lap belts, were thrown violently, but remained partially in the overturned vehicle, unable to exit without risking drawing the herd's attention. Jonas, who rarely wore his seatbelt to maintain mobility while driving, was ejected through the open side, landing 8 feet from the wreckage. He was conscious, attempting to crawl away on his hands and knees when the matriarch reached him. She had not charged blindly, but had pursued her perceived threat. Her front right foot came down on Jonas's lower back with her full weight behind it, pinning him to the ground. The sound, described by one passenger as like breaking timber, was followed by Jonas's scream, which cut off abruptly as she raised her foot and brought it down again, this time on his upper torso. The elephant stomped 3 more times in rapid succession, each impact driving Jonas's body deeper into the dirt. Catastrophic thoracic compression with multiple rib and sternal fractures occurred under the 3rd blow. She then used her head and tusks to flip and drag his motionless body several yards away from the overturned jeep before leaving it and going back to her herd. This dragging behavior is unusual, but has been documented in several instances with different encounters. One of the brothers managed to reach the emergency radio mounted in the overturned jeep. Rangers arrived 26 minutes after the radio call. They found Jonas Varelli dead approximately 12 yards from the overturned jeep, his body so severely crushed that they initially had difficulty determining his position. The coroner's preliminary report noted massive blunt force trauma, bilateral pneumothorax, complete sternal and rib fractures, ruptured spleen and liver, and severe internal hemorrhaging. Varelli's company dissolved within 6 months, unable to survive the lawsuit filed by the passengers and the suspension of the company's operating permits following investigation. The authorities used the incident to justify stricter enforcement of off-road driving regulations and mandatory safety training for private operators. And while Kruger's elephant left one man in the dirt, a diamond trader in Namibia would track a wounded leopard straight into its jaws. It was July 30th, 2013. The acacia brush stretched endlessly across the savanna just 40 miles northeast of Windhoek, the golden grass whispering in the midday heat. Aaron Salvek, a 55-year-old diamond trader from Johannesburg, moved through the thorn scrub with his rifle raised, following the blood trail of the leopard he had just wounded. Aaron had made his fortune in the South African diamond trade, building a reputation as a shrewd negotiator who operated on the fringes of the industry's gray markets. His colleagues knew him as a man who took calculated risks in business and applied the same philosophy to his leisure pursuits. According to friends and family, over the past decade, hunting had become more than a hobby. It was a measure of dominance, a way to prove himself in spaces where wealth meant nothing without skill. He had traveled to Namibia twice before, taking springbok and kudu without incident. But this trip was different. This time, he wanted a leopard, and he had paid handsomely for a private concession that offered minimal oversight and maximum freedom. What set this expedition apart was Aaron's insistence on tracking without professional guidance during the final approach. The hunting outfitter, a veteran named Willem Botha, had assigned 2 experienced Herero trackers to accompany Aaron. The diamond trader made it clear from the start that he preferred to make his own decisions. His hunting journal, recovered later, contained multiple entries dismissing the advice of guides as overly cautious. He had written that true hunters needed to rely on instinct rather than the timidity of men who had grown soft from guiding tourists. That morning, Aaron had spotted the male leopard drinking at a waterhole. African leopards are among the most dangerous animals to hunt when wounded, a fact that experienced hunters treat with deadly seriousness. These cats typically weigh between 100 and 200 pounds, but their compact, muscular build belies their explosive power. Leopards can leap over 20 feet horizontally and 10 feet vertically from a standstill. Their jaws are capable of puncturing the trachea and damaging major blood vessels, but they more often clamp and suffocate than surgically sever arteries, and their canine teeth, measuring up to 2 inches long, are designed to penetrate deep into vital areas. Most critically, wounded leopards often circle back and ambush their pursuers, rather than fleeing, a behavior professional hunters widely regard as one of the most dangerous scenarios encountered in African tracking. The trackers advised waiting for a clearer shot, but Aaron fired from approximately 150 yards as the animal moved behind a termite mound. The bullet struck low and back, tearing through the leopard's abdomen rather than hitting the vital chest cavity. The wounded cat let out a coughing roar and vanished into the dense acacia scrub. Blood splatter at the site confirmed a gut shot, one of the worst possible outcomes in dangerous game hunting. Protocol required the party to mark the hit site and withdraw for several hours before tracking, allowing the animal time to weaken or die from its injuries. The trackers explained this to Aaron in both English and broken Afrikaans, pointing to the bright red blood mixed with stomach contents that indicated a non-fatal wound. A gut-shot leopard could survive for hours or even days, and the pain would make it viciously aggressive toward anything it perceived as a threat. But Aaron, angrily expressing worry that the animal would escape the concession boundary into protected land where recovery would require official authorization and risk seizure of the carcass, decided to pursue it immediately. He chambered another round and followed the blood trail into the brush, with the trackers reluctantly following several yards behind. The terrain grew denser as they moved deeper into the thornveld, visibility dropping to mere feet in places. 20 minutes into the pursuit, the trail led through a natural corridor between 2 massive termite mounds, each standing nearly 8 feet tall. The trackers stopped at the entrance to this passage, one of them calling out to Aaron to wait while they circled around to check for an ambush site. Aaron waved them off impatiently and entered the corridor alone, his rifle at his shoulder. According to the investigation, the leopard had doubled back and was waiting in the low branches of a camelthorn tree just inside the corridor, exactly at head height. Witnesses reported that Aaron never saw it coming. The cat launched from less than 6 feet away, hitting him with the full force of its 180-pound body. The impact drove Aaron backward, his finger still tightening on the trigger as the rifle discharged into the air as he fell. The leopard's front claws, each over an inch long, sank deep into Aaron's shoulders, hooking into muscle and holding him immobile as its jaws clamped onto his throat. The cat's canines punctured his trachea and lacerated major vessels in the initial strike. His hands came up instinctively to push the animal away, but the leopard's claws ripped through the flesh of his forearms. The trackers ran forward, one fumbling for the radio while the other raised his rifle, but hesitated. Shooting risked hitting Aaron. For nearly 30 seconds, the leopard maintained its grip, shaking its head with the same motion it would use to break the neck of an impala. Aaron's struggles grew weaker, his movements becoming spasmodic twitches rather than purposeful resistance. The sandy ground beneath them turned dark with blood. Then, suddenly, the leopard released its grip and staggered sideways, collapsing less than 10 feet away. One of the trackers immediately radioed the hunting camp for emergency medical evacuation, while the other attempted to staunch the bleeding from Aaron's throat using his own shirt. By the time rescue reached the scene and loaded Aaron onto a stretcher, he had been without a pulse for multiple minutes. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination and airway compromise secondary to leopard attack. The outfitter, Willem, faced suspension of his guiding license for 6 months for failing to assert professional authority. The hunting concession where Aaron died implemented a strict policy requiring clients to demonstrate proficiency with their weapons and agreement to follow professional guidance or face immediate termination of their hunt. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.